Welcome to Dead Genre Chronicles, a critical podcast on the diversity of JRPGs. Drawing from the origin of the genre to the present day, every month we play through a JRPG and we invite you to play along and send us your questions and thoughts on it. I'm Devin. I don't have a joke this time.
I'm Becky. I'm going to go back in time and fix Devin's joke in the other timeline.
I'm Leroy and I'm Marco IRL.
It's true. It's true.
And today we have a guest. If the guest would be so kind as to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ted. I'm a grad student at Western studying archival science and history, and I'm a friend of Becky's.
Hi, Ted.
Hello.
Hi, Ted. So this episode we're going to be talking about Radiant Historia, which is a DS game by Atlus, which was recently remade for 3DS with an easy mode and narrative editions, as seems to be the norm for Atlus remakes as of late. And people in this call are very mad about the narrative editions.
Yep.
We'll get to those. The story centers around a man named Stocke, who is given the White Chronicle, a relic that allows him to traverse his personal history to alter the events of two timelines that play out in parallel and concern the fate of two nations at war and eventually the world, which is the most neutral way I could pitch this game. We only have one thing from the audience, and it's from Saori, and she says, hey guys, I just want to ask that if you use any academic or philosophical terms like teleology or structuralism, please also explain what they mean. Which
I feel really called out right now.
I think that was the point.
So normally this would be a me call out, but this is totally a Ted call out.
Yeah, that is me. I will try. Please remind me.
The fourth word you ever said about this game was teleology.
Yeah.
Right, so official DGC recommendation: play this game on easy mode. Good grief!
I actually played it on normal, and it wasn't too bad. But the final dungeon, I wanted to just throw my 3DS out the window. It was awful.
It's balanced so you could skip all the battles, but they want you to fight every single battle. It was actually really easy this time around because I played the perfect mode and they didn't adjust the balance at all. So I did all the Nemesia missions additional to all the normal content, and it threw all the balance out. They didn't adjust the game for that.
Yeah. Also, the way easy mode works is for the random encounters. The random encounters are roving on the level maps, and instead of being able to hit them to stun them, you hit them to win the encounter and get all the XP rewards. So I finished the game at max level on all three of my main party characters.
Oh wow.
Which it's balanced. The final bosses of the additional content, extra hard stuff, are balanced for about level 60, 65. And I didn't quite one round the final boss, but it was close.
I think the battle system's really fun, so I would advise just trying it out and see if you like it or not before turning on the easy mode.
Yeah, the combat has cool ideas.
Yeah.
It opens up way more toward the end, too, once you start getting character-specific skills that are locked behind side quests, which is a really dumb way of adding the parts that are actually fun and adding the depth to it. Gafka, for example, has an attack that draws all the enemies to the center. He just AoE that draws all the enemies to the center, and it's really fun, bouncing off that and doing all kinds of combos.
Gafka gets loads of really good movement abilities. The problem is that my third party member was Marco, who, sorry Leroy, has no good movement abilities.
Marco's actually just the worst character in the game, unfortunately.
He really is.
Yeah.
He's very sweet, but he's not useful. But I used him all the same, damn it.
Yeah, this is the first time I used Stocke, Rainy, and Marco. It's the first time I used Stocke, Erica, and At, who are the strongest people, period. And this time I was like, I'll use Marco this time. I don't need to use the powerful characters just because they're powerful.
Yeah, my party ended up being because of how, the balance kind of, gets all weird, too, because, your party members shift constantly depending on where you are in the plot and which timeline you're in, and you don't get experience for party members that aren't there, obviously. So there would be long stretches where I just, did a section of a history, and I just didn't have characters from the other history, so they would be I got back to fucking Rosh, and he was level 12, and everyone else was 45, and I was just the fuck? So
Yeah.
I basically just stuck with Stocke, Rainy, and Marco because they were always the highest level. So I was just like,
yeah,
okay.
that's what usually happens.
That's one advantage. Sorry, go ahead, Ted.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you kind of have to go out of your way to make the other characters better, because they're not there all the time. In fact, it was kind of frustrating when you start picking up people besides Rainy and Marco, because the whole combat system is moving units around and comboing off of that, and all of these new characters who are cool, and I want to use them, like, start with nothing in terms of movement manipulation, and it was kind of frustrating.
Yeah, that's one advantage of doing all the optional stuff, is that once you get to the point where it's possible to just do it all as a blanket chunk, you have all the characters available. So even the characters that I never used, who were just in my off-party, got plenty of off-party XP.
Mm-hmm.
And they also added the Vault of Time, which gives you your entire party that you've recruited up to that point, irrespective of where you entered the Vault of Time from, which is neat if you want to engage with the system, and also offers another way to get items and like equipment without needing to grind for gold, which if you're playing on friendly, which is the easy mode, and you're killing everything still gives you the same amount of gold, I think. I'm not sure. And like, that's a tiny amount of gold. You will not be able to upgrade your party terribly often.
I mean, it starts to add up eventually, but yeah, it's an admirably stingy game economically.
It's actually enough gold to upgrade 3 party members, but it's hard if you want to use more. Which again is the whole structure just like makes you use Stocke, Rainy, and Marco for some reason.
Yeah, there's some nuance to the equipment system as well, because there's like, particularly with the stuff that you can buy, there's a whole thing with stealing, and there are massive stealing guides online, and I didn't get into that stuff at all, but with the equipment that you can buy, there are often not clear upgrades. You have to think a bit about what the stats do. The problem is that physical defense always wins out, because it's the most valuable stat.
Yeah, and whatever stat gives the character you're looking at more attack for what they're good at. Like, I would give Stocke more strength, but if I was looking at Rainy, I'd probably go with magic, and that's about it.
Well, even then, I found myself casting spells with Stocke in the late game because he was doing twice as much damage with his level 2 fire spell as he was with any physical attack.
Yeah, magic is also weird.
So the game's balanced like SMT, where if you don't buff your characters, you don't do any damage. But if you magic boost Stocke and you power up Stocke, either of those, if either of those are on him, he will do more damage with physical every time. Especially if he has Historica. Yeah. But if you don't buff him, you won't be able to break the defense threshold, and you always do less damage than magic, which is, I don't know.
Right, okay.
Plus, like, the healing is kind of weird in the sense that, at least for me, near the end, I just kept Stocke alive because Resurrection was so good and cheap that I would just let people die constantly and then just resurrect them for, like, 7 MP or something like that, whereas like groups heal spells would be like 15 MP, and it's just like more economical to just let people die and then bring it back to life.
That's legitimately how I played the end of Persona 4. I just let everyone die and full revive them.
Yes.
I don't know, Atlus just does it like that. They're just like, revive spell's cheap and the boss is going to kill you, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Which Atlus team was this game? Is it the SMT team?
It's the Megami Tensei team. Most of it.
Right.
It's like some of the team that went on to make 4.
Okay.
But then also just other people from other parts of Atlus.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting to compare this to Nocturne next time. Maybe. But, I mean, that more or less covers the, like, combat systems. Who's ready to talk about time travel?
I want to be in the alternate timeline where I didn't play this game.
Oh, man. Like, it's not really a time travel story in any conventional sense of the word. If you look at, like, even what time travel stories mean in video games, there's kind of a tradition of, like, Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross and Majora's Mask, and this game isn't even that interested in time travel, really.
What Stocke really gets is a do-over button more than the ability to travel through time.
It's more comparable to Steins Gate, kind of.
It's more like Groundhog Day.
I mean,
I guess it's kind of like Steins Gate, but Steins Gate is trying to move somewhere. And I mean, with Radiant Historia, nothing really changes. It's just Stocke lets it go back and do it again.
I picked the wrong choice this time. Oh no, Ott exploded.
I feel like it was really the game that I kept thinking about was Braid, because Braid is very linear as well. It's just a platformer, but you get to redo all of your mistakes, I guess. And so Radiant Historia kind of felt the same way, that the time is really linear. You're not really changing a lot. And it's kind of weird, actually, that it implies that Stocke has lived like a bajillion lives, but stays the same, like doesn't change at all. Like you'd think that would affect you, but
I think the change they're going for, it's like really tenuous, I guess. But Stocke is changing, but he's like becoming more resolved. They contrast it with the villain, who becomes more unhinged the more he travels through time.
Right.
Yeah. Stocke kind of already starts out too nice for his journey to be more nice to have that much impact.
I mean, if you're writing the edgy anime deconstruction, yes, Stocke would. It happens in Steins Gate too. Devin brought up Steins Gate. As Okapi travels through time, he just gives up. He loses hope. He's like, everything's the same. Nothing's real. Like, it's all contingent on where I am in time, and nothing I do actually has consequences. And he kind of just like stops his reason for living, basically. But Radiant Historia is, again, not about time travel, so those consequences don't come into play. I called it I don't even remember how I said it, but it's like, the way I interpret it is like a game about dialectics, and I'm not going to define that word because I don't fucking know how to define dialectics properly. But the basics of dialectics is just like two concepts come together that are maybe opposing, they might not even be opposing, whatever, but together they make a synthesis that is more correct than they were separate, and that's what dialectics is. And so Stocke makes mistakes, gets to redo the situation and learn from it, and kind of become a better person. And I think that's reaffirmed. There's like one line Stocke says where, I don't remember who was talking to him. I think it was, I don't remember. It was one of the party members at the end where they were like, I can't believe you did all this, Stocke. And Stocke's like, I didn't do anything special. I just tried to do the right thing at every point in time when I was given a choice.
That kind of, so the thing that fucks that up is if you're playing to complete the game and get all the endings, whenever you're faced with a choice that's like, clearly one of these is going to be a bad end, you always go for the bad end first. It's like, yeah, that's definitely the one where everyone dies. Let's do that.
Yeah.
But you don't need the bad ends to get the good end, though. They're just for fun.
Yeah.
But they put a counter on it, and I had to put the counter to max.
They put a counter on it.
That just reminds me of like fucking any visual novel really that has like a collection of like bad ends. Like fucking Fate Stay Night has so many bad ends because that's like a fantasy adventure thing where your fucking character can just get murdered because he made a bad choice, and they have a collection of like skits that come out of that because two of the characters out of canon berate you for being an idiot and have a bunch of jokes at your expense. And it's just like, it kind of felt like that, except there was no jokes. It was just blew up. Stocke's now the best fighter in the world, and nothing changes.
I'm going to make Devin's head explode. It's totally stealing from Nier Automata.
I've read I used to read the old Choose Your Own Adventure books, the ones that are branded Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah.
And they were like that too. Like, you're like, you see a door, do you open the door? Oh, it's actually, you open the door to space, you got sucked out in space and died. And it's like, okay.
There are so many like that. Like, even in the Fighting Fantasy game books, there'll be like 30 bad ends where you just step out onto nothingness. Or you open a door and there's an ogre on it behind it.
I think that's sort of slightly the inspiration. I'm not saying like it's amazing or good or anything, but it's kind of like an old Choose Your Own Adventure thing. Visual novels have that tendency too, is what I was relating to.
So I died, like, I got so many bad ends, not on purpose.
I did too, honestly. The first time I played, I wasn't trying to pick the bad end. I was role playing, like, which one's the best choice? Right. I pick it and I get the bad end, and I'm like, okay.
yeah, it was. I on one hand, I kind of appreciated it because, like, that's kind of how life is that you don't really know what is going to happen. That it's hard to make the right decision at that time because you don't have all the answers or whatever. But on the other hand, I don't know. It's like that you would get the bad ending, and then they'd be like chastising you, the two kids. They're like, "What an idiot!" You know, you're just like, well,
they are really, really patronizing sometimes. But like, I mean, the problem is most of the bad ends are banal, but there is a pattern running through them where any time that you support like a female character expressing agency, it's the wrong thing to do. Every time there's a choice that's like what should the woman do? It's always they should play their anointed role in society. Otherwise, the world ends. Because Atlus, I guess.
Yeah, I was pretty upset that they kind of tetra'd Erica at the end of the game. Because I really liked Erica as a character, and so I used her as much as I can. And then for like most of the kind of the ending of the game, she's just not available because she's kidnapped or whatever.
Which ending?
I've only done the,
You've
the
only done
normal
the-
one. I'm planning on doing the others, but
I think what Ted's saying is that Erica's not playable in the last dungeon until
yes.
you meet up with her at the very end before the last boss. So you can use Erica to fight Apocrypha, but you cannot use Erica in the final dungeon.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just like joshing, basically.
Right.
Oh. it is relatively pointless. Like at first the reason why you can't use these characters is because they're in different timelines, but that one is just Erica goes in before you and gets knocked out by DS. It's just like there's literally no reason for it. It doesn't even need to happen, but it happens for some reason.
Yeah, and that final dungeon does suck, because even on friendly, you have to fight the cubes, and it's just like, fuck off.
God,
Actually,
So-
those cubes are really easy with Ott if you have her
They're
super traps.
easy, but you have to fight them, and
No,
that's
they
the
don't
problem.
even. Ott uses like 8 mana per trap, and it takes like 3 traps, so...
The fact that you have to fight them at all is the problem. I killed them in one turn every fucking time.
I mean, there is very much too many of them, but yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
And if you want to get the perfect end, you have to fight the extra one as well to get the scroll, so you can get
There's-
the fucking quest.
Fuck.
There's more of them, or... Oh, when you go back through it, you mean?
No, like there's
There's a side passage that you have to use an extra cube on to get a scroll for a skill to get... Ugh.
yeah.
Yep. Actually, just rewinding a bit, the other thing that I think that the 2 timelines idea actually ends up being, structurally, is it's a bit more like a light world, dark world in feel. Like it's like a link to the past kind of thing.
Hmm.
It's not really like these are 2 alternate ways things have gone, because they're 2 separate and 2 different. It's more like here's one set of places and here's the other set of places.
They also stop diverging. I mean, you're right that it's 2 sets of places, but that's why I was thinking it's like Chrono Cross.
Yeah.
Even though we said it wasn't like Chrono Cross, but I think it is like Chrono Cross in that the differences are like it's the exact same world, and the differences can be massive in certain situations, but also like the same things are happening because it's really artificial at the same time.
Yeah, especially like the first like third of the split is like in each half you're playing a role that is true of someone else in the other half, and it's just really awkward because basically a lot of the same things are happening, and the divergence point doesn't really happen yet, and it's just like, can this like fucking diverge already, please? Like, you're supposed to be divergent.
It's kind of the same events that happen in a different order, actually, because what happens in both timelines is that all the countries that are being oppressed unite, and then they either fight Alastil, who was stronger, or they fight Granark, who was stronger. But
Yeah,
only the order really changes.
I just mean like you literally talk to like the agent, and then go, oh, we need to save this merchant. And then you go to the other timeline and go, oh, hey, we saved this merchant. Oh, hey, the agent. And it's just like, okay, can we do something different now, please?
I actually hate how the timelines supposedly influence each other too, because it's just
It's arbitrary.
your actions in the other timeline reverberate to both timelines. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
It didn't like really great to me until I started playing the possible worlds. Then every possible world somehow influenced the main world, and now it's just like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Possible worlds is just,
And aren't if there's 2 timelines in the first place, aren't they both possible worlds? They aren't the true worlds, but whatever.
No, one of them is the true world and one of them is the alternate world. Neither of them is possible.
Oh, true. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, all the possible world bad ends are like, oh, this mysteriously fucked everything up in both of the real timelines.
Yeah.
For no
Every time I
reason.
read that, I'm just like, what? But I guess
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter because nothing's really fucked up. Because once Stocke says, "Okay, I'm turning the page backwards," that didn't happen.
Yep.
it's, the possible worlds thing, because so the way I played it was the way that the game suggested, which was if you hadn't played it before, play the original game first or whatever, and then you play the, what is her name? Nemesia stuff. And at first I was like, this is really clumsily shoot in, because once you finish the game, it's like, oh, by the way, you know, and they literally just like go through all the cutscenes where you meet her, like sequentially. They're like, just sit back. And they literally say, like, sit back, there's no combat, just watch the cutscenes. And then you go to the boat. And I was like, that is a really clumsy shoehorning in of this kind of additional content. But then afterwards, as I started doing them, I was like, I'm kind of glad, because these ruined the story.
It's so bad.
Yes. Like, it's almost like Atlus was self-aware. They were like, we know that this additional content is actually kind of garbage, and it's going to ruin everything, so, like, we'll just put it at the end. Enjoy the original story first, and then just have this additional content, I guess, you know, kind of this.
The real problem is that they added 3 scenes to the original story, if you do all the Nemesia stuff, where characters who are major, massively important villains in the story are instead transformatively redeemed. And it's so stupid.
It's, it kind of robs and that was like a big problem with me too, is that it robs the kind of the drama of the original story.
Yeah.
Like, Hugo especially just comes off as like, I'm trying to like think of a way to put it, like, he comes off loony, because he just is constantly flip-flopping back and forth between, am I this like really cynical, you know, power-hungry politician who doesn't actually believe in any of this, you know, Noah stuff, or do I actually really, you know, am I, the reason why I went bad was because I was so religious, which is just like,
First he's a dictator, then he's a god, then in the end he actually just loves Jesus Christ.
yeah. And then like Protea and like all of the villains get this weird redemptive.
Protea ends up as a communist farmer in Cornet Village. It's just...
I might be like ascribing a little bit, like, I'm gonna say they're better than they are, maybe. At least I thought Diaz and Selvin were actually really sympathetic villains usually, which war stories often pull off. Like, these guys suck, but here are the reasons, like, they were under an oppressive rule, and now they don't trust anyone, whatever, that kind of thing. But I liked how the original scenario drew lines. Like, you could see where they're coming from, but, you know, they're bad guys.
Right.
But then, yeah, the new games, like, there are no lines. Everyone can just be... Put aside your differences, you know, we're all the same. And it's like, no, we're not.
Well, I mean, it's the perfect chronology, right? It's the, like, fairy tale happy ending.
Yeah.
Like, that seems to have been the thought process, is we'll just go through this and take out every possible cause for angst, or bad feeling, or not complete perfect faith in humanity.
So I haven't finished the extra content, but something I really like about the original game is that the main antagonism force, the thing that drives everyone on, is climate change. And I play the game, and I'm like, man, this is real, because climate change is real.
Right.
but then when you get to the new extra content, it turns out the reason there's climate change is because there's a monster eating all the mana, and you need to beat it. And I'm like, like, before in the original story, there's climate change because people are misusing the resources and they're not giving back. And it even says, like in the text, there's ways that people could try to restore the balance of, they say mana, what they mean is nature, whatever. But then in the extra content, it's like, no, you just beat the big bad monster and then we're good. And it's like, what the fuck?
Well, like, the actual way it plays out in the final finale is a little bit more nuanced than that, because...
Okay, good.
Like, killing the monster doesn't restore the mana. Okay?
Right.
The mana isn't...
But it stops the mana from being drained.
It stops the mana from being drained, but you've still got to... Like, they've still got to stop using Thaumaturg and start actually planting stuff that will restore the environment. Like, there's a scene that very explicitly says that. It's like, okay, we stopped the desertification's progression, and provided we don't use Thaumaturg, it won't continue, but we've still got a bloody great big desert that we need to do something about.
It's still a better 1-2 punch when the monster is people, though, instead of like magic monster.
Yeah. But then, I mean, the cause of the desertification was always, I guess they retcon it into being like there's a single monster, but also the old imperial society caused the desertification.
Right, but they caused it with the use of Thaumaturg, which Alastor still uses, so it's kind of like... I know Radiant Historia is like, tries to make all these places not really as much his fault as they should be, but it's still like, they make it clear like they're still responsible for it, I guess.
But the monster is the result of like Thaumaturg experiment.
Oh, okay. So it's like the same difference. They just made it into the last boss.
Yeah, basically. I'd say that's the one thing that the Perfect Chronology doesn't completely sell down the river. Like, it doesn't handle it well, but it doesn't throw it out altogether. Like, the fact that you can then, like, the actual perfect end, if you not only do all Nemesia's quests, but find all the chests in the extra final Red Chronicle dungeon.
There's a final dungeon? Are you serious?
There's a final dungeon. There's like...
It's new. It's new.
It wouldn't be an Atlas game without a final dungeon.
It's
That's
not
true.
even. It's all you do is you go around like the same. You just walk around towns, but now there's goblins inside them.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, I love the fucking... What's that place? Fucking Labyrinth of Memories from Vesperia, where you just revisit fucking every boss room at...
It's called the Labyrinth of Time or History or something stupid in this game.
Yeah. It's 9 pre-existing areas from the game that you revisit with new monsters and slightly different furniture, and in each one of them there's 3 triggers you have to hit and then a bunch more that you can hit, and if you hit all the triggers, and it's not hard to find them at all, then you get the Seed of Possibility, which allows you to return to the void where you fought the monster and rescue the monster, the human that used to be the monster.
Amazing. They're just doing the same story again, but with even dumber stakes.
So there's the ending, and then there's the perfect ending where like Stocke gets to live, and then there's the ending where Stocke gets to live, and also like Nemesia's lover, who used to be the monster and has been consigned to the void beyond forever, gets to live.
Chrono Trigger, but you get to save Lavos. Great.
I mean, it is kind of, yeah.
This is kind of the weird thing about JRPG or any game, I think, that has like the quote unquote true ending. I guess Atlas games really, but like because the true ending usually sucks compared to the actual ending. Like, because I really enjoyed Radiant Historia, even though there's a lot of problems with the time travel and the history and all that stuff. Like, at its core, it's a game about a guy who finds out that he has to make a really big sacrifice and kind of steals his resolve for that and then does it, right? And it's kind of this idea of like, you know, like sometimes life sucks and to do things you have to kind of give stuff up. And sometimes your life to do something that you feel is really important to you. And so like in the perfect, or not in the perfect ending, the regular ending, like Keel comes back, right? And so like Keel, like his death was like, I was like, dang, that sucks. And like was kind of the first moment where I was really engaged with Radiant Historia's story, because I was like, oh, there's like actual consequences. Like you can't go back and save him. Like there are certain things that have to happen. And then he comes back at the end and I'm just like, Keel, what? Like, because it robs Keel of his own character progression arc where he, you know, kind of makes that decision to give up his own life to like save others, right? Like, and so like, it cheapens it. And so I felt like I had a suspicion that the true ending was like, oh, Stocke gets to live, which is like, well, then what's the point of the whole game?
The point of the whole game is of the true ending. Sorry, I definitely prefer the normal ending. The point of the true ending is that Heist sacrifices himself instead of Stocke. So it's this really weird, problematic. You can reconcile with your abuser if you try hard enough.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, like, I was already like, well, if fucking Heist was going to be a sacrifice anyway, shouldn't he be able to be sacrificed now, and then Stocke can get to stay with the New World? And then it was just like, no, you get to beat the ever-loving shit out of Heist first, and then he just fucking dies. And then you get to sacrifice yourself, and I'm like, okay, but no, the thing, but whatever. And then I was done, and I didn't, like, I looked through the intro to Nemesia's stuff, and I was just like, no, I'm good. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. This is why Nier is the only good JRPG.
I'm gonna fight you.
There's a way to write that last scene with Heist, though. I honestly think it could have been a good scene. But what Stocke says, he walks up to Heist and says, "Thank you, you made me who I am." And I'm like, no, fuck! It's the worst thing you can say.
Yeah.
It's like because Stocke could have, I don't know, there's all kinds of things you can say to try to reconcile with someone who did something horrible to you, and they just went for the most dullest brain, idiotic, obviously never had conflict with their family kind of answer in their life kind of thing.
Yeah, so, like, in the regular ending, like, Heist kind of, like, there was a lot of, at first, like, resolution in terms of, like, Heist kind of appears throughout the whole game as this kind of cold-hearted mastermind, right? Like, chess master, ninth dimensional chess master, whatever. But then in the end, he is kind of reduced to this person who just was, like, really obsessed with Stocke. And, like, really obsessed with this idea that here's another person who could potentially understand what I'm going through and agree with my decision to destroy the world because he is just so pissed off about the fact that the lot that he was given. And Stocke doesn't become that, and he kind of ends up becoming this really pathetic person where you're like, oh yeah, like, this guy is not, like, a genius. He's just really pathetic. And the Stocke walks away from that. He says in the regular ending, he's like, you know, I understand why you did it and your intentions are pure. I'm like, no, they were not. They were not pure intentions.
I mean,
yeah.
But it's like Stocke
pure,
being like, you know, right. Well, yeah, they're not good pure.
What the writers are trying to do is, like, make this tragedy of circumstance. And they go out of they try really hard too, in that they say the White Chronicle lets you see good things and the Black Chronicle lets you see bad things. So it's not really Heist's fault, which is kind of dumb too. But no, I totally agree with that. I like Heist becomes really pathetic and cowardly, and in that I actually think he's one of the more sympathetic portrayals of a villain. In the end, kind of like I'm going to say this, everyone's getting mad at me. Kind of like Kylo Ren in Star Wars,
or even like. I feel like he's a more realistic or understandable Kefka, and even the final boss is like resembling.
He's like Kefka, but with like an actual motivation you can make sense of.
Yeah. Also, I just want to point out, like, the intention of the Black Chronicle is to, like, not necessarily to see the bad things, but to, like, reflect on the past.
It was supposed to reflect on the grief of the sacrifices and the kind of like how difficult it was for them or whatever. It's kind of unclear in the text too, because you don't get to see Heist's point of view. But yeah,
God, can you imagine if the perfect end stuff had been you play the game from Heist's point of view?
I fucking
wow.
that would be that would be better than Possible World crap.
Maybe.
I love Kingdom
convinced.
Hearts Chain of Memories Reverse Rebirth. That is a Becky cut only.
I mean, I've never played Reverse Rebirth because I couldn't get past the end of, like, actual Recon.
That's the one where you play as Riku, right?
That's the one where you play as Riku.
Yeah, I played through all that. It's good. I mean, we're still talking about Stocke's death without talking about how I got there, but I guess that doesn't matter. But I guess honestly, I'm not super attached to the fact that Stocke has to die or not, because his resolve to do it is, like, just as important as if he actually dies.
Yeah,
definitely.
To me,
yeah,
because I don't know. I think in fiction, really, death's metaphorical. It's never really death because your game doesn't get destroyed. I know that's kind of like a really pedantic way of putting it, but.
Well, it's especially true in pulp and in anything that's got any connection to a comics tradition, right?
Right.
Like a serial storytelling tradition. And, like, Radiant Historia doesn't have that strong a connection, but it's there.
If I was going to say, I mean, the only death in video games is near.
Yeah.
Right? So unless you do that, like, Stocke doesn't die even when he dies. And the metaphor is still really strong even if he comes back to life. But I mean, I still can't stand by all the villains being good guys, that's secretly good guys. That's just really bad.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with if Stocke comes back to life is then it's literally just a biblical retelling.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, oh, he died for our sins.
For our sins. Well, Gafka just is like, do you know what real strength is? And I was dying. Because he basically says the real strength is Jesus Christ. No, no.
In the original Perfect End content, Gafka's scene is him being really strong, and some kids are like, "Wow, you're really strong," and he does give them well, you know what real strength is, kids. It's amazing.
Cool youth pastor.
it's not the funniest thing that happens in the optional stuff. The funniest thing that happens, I cannot really do it justice, is Hugo's good end, where it turns out that the reason Hugo has become such a monstrosity is that the Prophet Noah hasn't died, but is in suspended animation, and there's no means of restoring him. And then you present Hugo with the means of restoring him, and Hugo goes, shit, if I'd the only person who could actually use this is Fennel, the engineer. But I just killed him. And then Fennel, there's not even a beat. Fennel, who is already kind of like a car anyway, just trundles in from off screen and goes, by the way, I've got an auto repair in this thing.
Fennel says, I knew you were going to kill me. It's like, what?
It's so good. I was howling. Like, this game doesn't do jokes. It doesn't deliberately do funny things very much at all. But that was so funny.
Also, Fennel, whoever did the voice acting for Fennel, just went above and beyond. Like the one where, I think it's one of the possible worlds where he has a breakdown, right? Like his circuits are malfunctioning, and the voice actor is literally just like, I was like, this is fantastic.
I think the voice acting is actually the best part of the remake. It's the only good reason to play the remake instead of the original.
You were yelling about it when it first happened.
That's because Stocke is the Persona 5 guy, but I got over it.
It's
also,
true.
Also, I don't remember his name now, but the Cygnus guy is Near Daddy, and I was laughing at that too.
Jameson Price, yeah.
Which they're both in Persona 5. They're both in Persona 5.
Well. Atlus gonna do.
Okay, so because I didn't finish it, what's the deal with Noah? Like, does he know what's going on?
I don't know. There's no deal with Noah.
There is no deal with Noah. Okay.
I don't get it. I don't get their portrayal of Noah. Noah seems to know everything that happens in all the timelines, and they portray him as a demigod basically through the power of Thaumatek. And he was real, and he knows what's going on, but he just all that I played, he just leaves because he thinks there shouldn't be any religion in Alistil anymore. They should try that's the problem. But he's also actually the way they portray him is actually a deific figure. So the religion is founded on truth, at least objective material truth, I should say, instead whatever. So it's a really weird. I don't even know how to reconcile it.
So I think it's kind of suggested that Art, because she's the shaman, can see Teo and Lipti, the time twins, and is sometimes sensitive to what Stocke's doing. And the impression I kind of got was that Hugo had some of the same sensitivity, and that was why he was a prophet and not just a kind of socialist revolutionary.
You mean Noah and not Hugo?
Noah, yeah, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's the idea. Because in the original game, presumably Noah didn't appear at all.
He did not. It was left in the air if he was ever even alive, which I liked that a lot.
Yeah. Whereas in the possible histories, there's a storyline running through that of Stocke going to possible worlds and encountering versions of Noah in them. And as you go through those, you get insights into Noah's character, but he very much, he has literal prophetic insight. Not necessarily seeing the future all the time, but seeing beyond the physical, beyond the material, beyond the immediate. And I think the only way you can cash that out is that he's supposed to have some sort of sensitivity to fate in something like the way that Art does.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's weird mythology too. There's definitely more than one gods who are real in Radiant Historia. If the time twins are like a god, there's also the dumb goblin god who's named Vanquir, which is the same name as the world. So
Master Vanquir, yeah.
I don't know what to make out of it, but that's a pretty good read.
Well, Master Vanquir is kind of the personification of kind of pre-Christian nature spirit type gods, and then you've got the Noah religion, which is a religion led by a prophet, but he's not the prophet of a specific deity, which is an interesting one because I think that happens a fair bit in.
That's what religion is yeah.
But no, I mean, if in the West, when you tell a story of a religion, it's got to be a story of Christianity. So it has like material religious leaders, but they're specific about their gods, and the gods are actual powers in the fantasy that you can tap. Whereas something that happens in Japanese games, I think, is there's a tendency to have a religion where there's no specific content given to what these priests are priests of. They're just priests, which is clearly an image of Christianity, right? Or an image of Christianity as the kind of imperial presence that it has in Japan.
Yeah, I mean, the history of religion in kind of like what we would call modern Japan is really fascinating, especially with their encounters with Christianity and then them trying to define what religion is, because it's a Western concept when it's introduced in the 1850s, right, by America. They're like, you have to have freedom of religion, and they're like, what's religion, right? So, and so like, yeah, it is kind of interesting, the Japanese take on Christianity, because it usually is kind of contentless. It's like more morals than anything else. And then every now and then there's like an actual demon, like Final Fantasy Tactics, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, the FF Tactics thing is interesting, because there it turns out that the religion is a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
There is a divine power, but it's an evil divine power that has misled everyone. Whereas here, we're not specific about what's above the religious leaders, and they don't seem to talk about what's above them.
Right.
We assume that our priesthood in any Western religion are going to spend quite a lot of time talking about the god and invoking the authority of the god, but no one ever does that.
They do make it explicit, though, that religion was a factor in Alastor becoming warlike and fanatical.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
But even then, it was a lot of it is kind of the religion, whatever religion that Noah was a prophet of is vague, but it sounded like, at least the way I read it, was that it was a response to the desertification. And so Noah kind of was like, well, I think I have an idea of how to fix this, but Granorg is like, get out. So he takes like his followers up into the mountains, I guess, and they start like a new country, saying we're going to combat the desertification our way, and then there's a war.
Granorg was founded by the Empire, and the Empire caused the desertification because of Thaumaturg. So Granorg forbade the use of Thaumaturg. But Noah's like, our people are starving, we need Thaumaturg. And so, yeah, they deserted.
Right.
I see what you did there.
And I feel like the religious pilgrimage thing is like the thing that slots Alastor the most as this kind of distant interpreted image of America to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, Alastor's way more sympathetic and tragic than America, because America is not, but they're going for that sort of portrayal and feeling that Granorg is the royals, and Alastor has to leave the royals in order to pursue a better life, etc.
Yeah, there's some of that.
But the way they portray, I mean, yeah, like, it's kind of a mix, because the way they portray Alastor is this... I keep going back to Final Fantasy VI. It has like a Narsh feel to it, where everything's mechanical, it's dark, it's gloomy, the music is kind of gloomy, and then you get to Granorg and like, yeah, the kingdom's falling apart, but like the music is bright and cheery, and there's like, it's bigger, you know, there's more people there, and so it seems really ambivalent in terms of like...
It's also very clear that the nice places to be are kind of Celestia and maybe Cygnus.
Yeah.
You know, the places that are kind of semi-independent and have all the quite individualistic or naturalistic values. And like Cygnus and Celestia are very, very different cultures, obviously. But like Cygnus is the one that's most unequivocally good. There's no scenario where Cygnus is the bad guys. Even though they're a very amoral mercenary nation. They're also kind of not a nation at all, I guess.
I was just going to say, I think it's just kind of a weird bias in how RPGs present their towns anyways, because I feel like the point of Granorg is that it's supposed to look like it was great, and now it's not. And also, it also just looks like an RPG town. Whereas, when someone makes like an industrial town in a JRPG, it always looks like Narsh, like Alastor. But if you talk to the NPCs in Alastor, it's not the same kind of feeling. They're worried about the war, but they're all just normal living their lives because this is their home and it's normal to them. I think that's a decent contrast to, like, I feel like the reason Alastor looks gloomy is to get the player to feel like, this place kind of sucks, so like they can not feel out of place when Stocke finally like leaves.
Yeah.
I don't know. More than they're trying to say Alistair sucks, like as a place to live. I don't know. It's clumsy though because the game's clumsy.
Yeah. Just in terms of visual style, Alistair does look like the last town, the town around the villain's fortress, which it turns out to be eventually. But like that's the look of it. And whereas Granorg looks like the first city that you go to in the story after you leave your home village and there's a town and then you go to the city.
Mm.
But also, like, something that the basic experience of playing this game kind of suffers from, I guess, is that there's only 3 locations.
Oh, not only that, all the locations are ugly, and some of the most boring levels ever. This is something I immediately observed when I played it a long time ago. It's a joyless game to, like, be in, and you have to fight through the Sand Fortress, like, 5 times. I swear, you're just always going to the Sand Fortress.
Mm.
And the Lasville Hills, the Grand Plain, you just the whole game, which is, I mean, part of that is because it's a war story, and those are the border territories, and the frontier in both stories is moving back and forth across those 3 territories.
But also, the territories are just like rectangles, and a couple loose rectangles. Like there is no level design in these levels; they're extremely boring.
And it never really brings the war to life either. Like, you fight in several battles, but the battle is off screen.
Yeah. It is an interesting naturalistic way of telling your story, but like the part in Halo where you go back and replay the levels is also really boring.
I almost felt like, I was like, maybe, well, this probably wasn't intentional, but I was like, but it is doing a good job of like, wow, I have to do this again, which is, I'm sure, how Stocke felt all the time, right? Like, oh, I gotta do this again.
Yeah.
Go through time again.
I mean,
do this.
I think sometimes how boring the game is plays into its favor. It's like thematically trudging, I guess. Like the things Stocke has to do is like really menial, and the kind of growth Stocke goes through, at least the way it was for me in real life, is also really menial. Of like, oh, I screwed up. I guess I got to think about my actions and try to do better next time. And the next time can be like days and days and days in the future. And the progression is really, really, really slow.
Yeah, particularly when you're hunting down like optional stuff, and you think, oh right, clearly I need to go through those scenes again to do that scene, and it's a long sequence of scenes, and then you haven't hit all the triggers.
Or it wasn't the right scene. I did that once.
I did so much of that. I was trying to not rely too heavily on a guide, partly because guides for this game, as you might expect, are blitheringly complicated to read. But I was trying to not rely too much on a guide, and that was a mistake. I should have just glued myself to the guide from the beginning.
Yeah, I did the same thing, and by about halfway, I was like, no, I'm just gonna look it up. Tell me where to go, because it's not clear most of the time. So
I only had to look one thing up, and it was just to actually pick up the fucking sword so you could get it re-blessed with time power or whatever the fuck. Historica.
I forgot where to take Historica, even though I remember to pick it up. Like, it says Celestia, but I forgot you have to specifically go to What's-Her-Face. I want to say that's not my fault. Atlus didn't do a good job of portraying a lot of the characters.
Yeah, like, it's the things where you have to do a side quest and you have to find a particular trigger. Either it's blitheringly obvious, or it is so phenomenally obscure that you could never possibly work it out on your own. There is no middle ground. It's just... I think that's part of the glee that Volfers had, right? They wanted this game where you would take it very long to play it without a guide. But I don't know I don't know if that exists anymore. I don't know who's going to sit there going to, like, staring at every node and making theories on which one to go to. Like, once it hits that point for me, I'm going on GameFAQs.com. Well, I mean, the 2 people who've made full-length guides for this on GameFAQs are the 2 people who've done that. Basically.
That's true.
They're very good guides. Once again, we are greatly in your debt, GameFAQs game makers, game guide makers, but also you are cut from a different cloth.
Y'all some weebs.
Yeah. And it causes a weird... The pacing just gets weird, because sometimes you know exactly where to go, and so like this really dramatic event, or supposed to be dramatic, where you're going across space and time to like do this thing that is normally impossible without this power, which is cool, is like super compressed, because you're like, oh, I just like teleport, get the sword, teleport, bless it, teleport, right? Or you end up being like wandering through like every single node, being like, "Where's the freaking sword?" Right? Like, and it just drags, right? And so like the pacing gets all messed up. That was
and Stocke, and this is like, I think a lot of these things just come down to this game. Probably it's a new IP for Atlus, so it probably just didn't get the kind of TLC that their other games gets, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But Stocke never really acknowledges that he's been through time that much either. He just you go to the node and then he stands there, recites the same things again. And that makes it feel less like you're journeying through time and more that you went into chapter select and picked the chapter and you're sitting there.
Yeah. So early on in playing this game, I mentioned that it made me want to play Zero Escape. And one of the first things that Virtue's Last Reward does is it introduces this concept where like, you, the player character, named Sigma, for some fucking reason, get stuck in this game where you have to either ally or betray with different people, completely blind. It's the prisoner's dilemma, and you're trying to get to a point threshold. If you both ally, you get 2 points, or 1 point, I think? Anyway, prisoner's dilemma. Mm-hmm. One of the first major choices you get after, like, oh, which puzzle room do I want to go do? You come back from the puzzle room, and you have to choose whether to do ally or betray. And no matter what you do, you get the wrong answer. And you either betray someone, or you get betrayed. And the first instinct a lot of players have is to go back to that choice and do the other one. And the first thing that happens is Sigma goes, "But last time you did the other one!" And then he's just like, wait, why did I say that? Because he's still coming to grips with like the time travel power, which has just been revealed to be a narrative thing as well as a mechanic, for that, which is cool. But the fact that Stocke just like, unless you've already cleared a qualification for a thing, or know why you have to go get a qualification for a thing, and are talking to Lipti and Teo, he never brings it up. And it's really weird.
The game is like 10 years old though, but it would have benefited a lot from some like Undertale-isms, exactly like Devin described, where it flags stuff you've done and then adds like some new stuff in there. But okay, like another thing about the original game that the remake didn't have is it did not have the skip dialogue button. You'd have to sit there and mash through all the shit.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure if it didn't have the skip, it might have had the X to advanced dialogue thing, but it didn't have the touchscreen done one, you know?
Wow.
That's rough.
Kudos to the people who actually played through that game then.
Well, Leroy did, and that's why he suggested it for us.
Yeah, actually, I wish we did just play the original, though, so we wouldn't have to yell about the chronology content.
But then I wouldn't have been able to play it on friendly, and I would be even more miserable. Sorry.
No, I'm so mad about it because Nemesia is like me and a JRPG character, so I loved her to death. Like, I just loved her, and I actually really enjoyed the fact that in the beginning, Nemesia and Stocke just do not get along, and their personalities clash so much, and they're constantly like sniping at each other. Then they become friends, which I was like heartwarming. But wow, just wow, like it undercuts everything, you know, like everything that the original story is trying to tell. It just basically throws it out the window, and it's frustrating. Plus, it's just the Weatherlight all over again. For those of you who play Magic, like literally, you know, flying ship, collecting magical artifacts to beat the big bad. It's just Weatherlight.
I was trying to, like, you mentioned that earlier, and I was like, I know that reference. What's that to? That's what it's to. Yeah. That's deep Magic the Gathering from like mid-90s lore pools there. By the way, they like for the latest expansion, they kind of like. It's like a big thing because they went back to Dominaria for the first time in like 15 years or whatever, and they like literally resurrected the Weatherlight, and there's like a new crew, right, that are the descendants of the...
This sounds like World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Basically, except slightly longer time frames, but...
Yeah. World of Warcraft also just like, alright, this time, we're time traveling again. Say hi to Chromie.
Yeah. Also, like, the new Weatherlight, it has time travel too, which is just like...
Don't even try with the magic timelines.
Yeah.
Don't even try.
It's a mess.
Next, they'll make unhinged canon, which would be amazing, but also no. So this is the first podcast game that we've done, with arguably the exception of Nier, but not quite, where I've done all the optional stuff. Like Nier, I did all the optional stuff, but not all the trophies. I did all the optional stuff because even with all the problems that it has, I found it a really pleasant game to be in. Because, and I'm still trying to pin down exactly how to talk about why. So I'm going to try to explain why, and then you can explain to me why I've missed something or what I'm not getting about my own psychological state. Because I've been worrying at this thread for like 6 weeks, and I don't get it. But there's a kind of humour which feels to me like it's the only kind of humour that video games do. That is basically completely absent in Radiant Historia. There are no moments in this game where a character is cruel to another character for the audience's amusement in a way that doesn't make sense for the relationship between those characters to persist in the rest of the game. And this is an Atlus game. It's something I particularly associate with Persona, especially with characters like Junpei and Yosuke and Teddy, of course. And there's just none of that here. And that absence by itself was really refreshing to me because it's a kind of thing that makes me really uncomfortable when it happens. And it's not just in video games, it's also like big in sitcoms. Anytime that there's like pause, beat, laugh track, fade to black, move to the next scene after the problem has been restored, feels like the same kind of humour. But I really, really appreciated playing a game where there was none of that. There's only really 2 jokes in the entire game. One of which is gross, by the way, which is the like changing into the army uniforms scene with Rainey in the main story.
Since there's no CG in the original, it was more, it didn't really set an image. It was just like Rainey turns around and Mark was like, "What are you doing?" But
yeah, I mean, like it's that scene. The one thing to be said in defense of that scene is it kind of works for Rainey's character. She seems like the kind of person who wouldn't be terribly bothered.
Mm-hmm. And
whereas Marco's head would explode.
And it could have been way worse. Like the kind of it shouldn't have been in there, but a JRPG that puts it in there usually, well, you know what happens.
It's not an Atlus hot spring scene, which it would be in any other Atlus game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, one, I'm curious how they ended up doing that with this game. You would think that a new IP is not the place necessarily to experiment with that, or it'd be a bit of a risk. I have... Well, first is not a theory. The game has like a permeating aura of someone who loves their OCs too much, which is fine. so like they clearly love all of these characters, so no one's going to say any mean things to any of them because he loves them all. I mean, I think that's a real thing coming off of it. So like you get these over polite characters, which I also appreciate too, because I just said they kind of talk how I do and how I interact with people, and it's nice to see that in another piece of media. It's not even necessarily how I'd write these characters either, because I guess I'd probably write something closer to Undertale, because I do value humor. But I mean, Undertale's a game where everyone's nice to each other too. So, but yeah, that's just they're kind of similar games, just where the NPCs are usually really respectful for each other, even when they disagree. Sometimes it goes overboard too, though, when Stocke's like, "You're valid, Heist." It's like,
yeah.
But
I mean, that was kind of the thing that really I was surprised to really appreciate, which was with Selvan and Diaz, who are totally banging, right?
I feel like they're based off of Reinhard and Kirky Ice from Legend of Galactic Heroes. One's a redhead, one's a blonde. They're both pretty boys. I'm gonna say that's pretty intentional.
I haven't seen that one, but I will take your word for it. But they're just they're friends, right? Like, I mean, they're bad guys. Bad guys can have friends, and they're clearly looking out for each other and respect each other. And I appreciate the fact that even the bad guys have friends, right?
And there's that side quest where it's revealed that they often go for meetings in a room in the tavern in the inn in Granorg.
Yeah, right. Like just hanging out at the hotel room.
Just a couple of guys.
Just two guys, 5 feet from each other because, But
I love GS and Sylvan this time, although it's obvious, like, gay-coded villain is, endlessly problematic.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are pretty good villains.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of just had him, when I first played, I had him registered as one-note characters, but then when DS gets really mad and starts talking about King Victor for, like, the first time anyone's ever talked about King Victor in the whole game, I was like, oh, holy shit. And, like, that was Erica's abusive dad, so it's not it's not fair that he yells at her like that, but, like, he's feeling it too, basically.
Yeah, I agree, though, that I think in terms of the characters, and I even though I guess I come in with time travel stories with a really low bar because it's hard to do a good time travel story, I feel like. So I didn't come in with any expectations of this being good. I actually thought it was going to be terrible, so I was pleasantly surprised at how much fun I had with the characters. And I think part of it is, yeah, they're very nice to each other, but also I think they're really earnest. Earnest, I guess. I don't know. But there is no comic relief character that I can think of.
Marco.
So, yeah. Well, Marco, yeah, but like that's just because he's a goofball in general. but even Marco is, he's sincere about his goofiness. Like he just is dense and kind of a goofball, but like also he cares a lot, and he cares about Rainey a lot. Rainey and Marco are good friends, and you can see that. And yeah.
There's not much kind of bro-y sidekick about him either.
Yeah.
Like, his loyalty stays with Rainey pretty consistently. There's the bit where, when you go to Granorg and you meet the Resistance, and clearly the Resistance are the good guys, and you're supposed to side with the Resistance and not kill Erica, and Rainey's really troubled by the prospect of betraying Alistel.
This is one of my favorite parts of the game.
It's like, this is one of the more robustly written from a character point of view bits, definitely. You can feel Rainey's got some real loyalties here. She's not just a good person, right? She's got loyalties that are meaningful and material to her, that are grounded in her character, and that Marco has immense sympathy for, but also Marco has, it's really less commitment to the kind of warrior concept of loyalty, I think, is the difference there. It's not that Marco has greater moral insight or is a better person or a more narratively sensitive person. It's that Marco is less the soldier. And I kind of appreciate that other positive male characters in the game are still kind of macho, kind of strengthy type people like Roche or the King of Cygnus, but Marco isn't. What comes across with Marco is, he's a bit of a hobbit, really. Like he's a bit of a Samwise Gamgee.
He's actually they slummed him in the remake. He's actually big and round in the original, and they gave him kind of like a shoujo little body. I'm like, what is this? This isn't Marco, but whatever. Another great Marco scene actually is the side quest where Stocke comforts Rainey, but Marco sets it up. Marco's like, hey, Stocke, Rainey's not doing so good. Can you go talk to her? But don't tell Rainey I told you this. Keep it between us.
Yeah.
Because
he's a good wingman.
Yeah, exactly. He wants it to be all Stocke's thing, even though Stocke's too oblivious to do anything.
Yeah, I've been totally suckered by Rainey as a character, I've got to admit. Like, it's just, I wish that was the baseline for female characters. She's not a good female character, but I wish that was the baseline rather than Erica, basically.
I also like how in the first half of the game, because Stocke is not talking and he doesn't like people, Rainey becomes the protagonist basically, and she's reacting to everything as a JRPG protagonist would, and she exposits things and she reacts to things, and it's fun. And like, Stocke doesn't have the luxury, or even he can't even be a character in the game. Like, when it comes to Coronet Village, it's just parentheses. Oh yeah, I already know what's going on, because and it's just like, wow. But so since Stocke can't be the protagonist there, Rainey's the one who struggles over whether or not to betray Alistel, and they do a really good job of portraying like actual stakes there. Like, the thing about patriotism and nationalism is that it's like, when something like climate change is going on, it's intellectually easy to understand the threat that it has to the world that goes beyond just your nation.
Just going to add in, it's very easy for a narrative to portray nationalism as unmotivating.
Yes, that's actually a common thing in both Japanese and American media, where there's like a common ground we have is that we have propaganda machines that love nationalism, and they creep into all of our stories and media too, where patriotism is the right thing to do and a normal thing to do. Everyone loves their country. It's something even as lame as Tokyo. Oh no, not Tokyo. What is it called? Oh yeah, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, another Atlus game, is actually basically Japanese nationalist propaganda the whole time, and it's unquestioned. And I'm just squinting like, what is this game?
I'm thinking more that there's a flip side to that, which is that where a narrative requires agents of the government to go against the government. So when James Bond goes rogue, or in the Mission Impossible films or something like that, there's no sense that any character in the story has actual material loyalty to their nation as a community that they belong to or anything.
Right. They're just selfish.
Well, no, they're never torn by the decision to betray the nation.
Right. I mean it like I know I'm right, so it doesn't matter, is what I mean.
Yeah. It is morally obvious that this nation is bad, therefore I have no compunction. Whereas Rainey is in that position where, one, it's not actually morally obvious at that point to her that Alastel is bad. And two, okay, she's got some inklings, but she's also got actual motivations to her community, which is like way truer to like human psychology. You know, she's loyal to a community that she grew up in, that she's being asked to defy in a way that, like, that's rare for the two pressures to be actually set in opposition like that.
I haven't read it a lot, but this is actually just a rare portrayal in general that they put out, like not a fantasy version of patriotism, but the normal version where my country is my family and my friends and my loved ones, and that's why I'm fighting. And then they're put in a situation where you can't fight for that reason if you care about your loved ones. And then the character actually earnestly has to grapple with that, because it's intellectually easy to understand, as Marco's over there like, oh yeah, I get it. But that's because Marco's only friend is Rainey.
Yeah.
But then Rainey's has Rainey and Rosh and Viola all really struggle with this concept.
And it's the being asked, think about your people. Are they actually bad people? Do you come from a group of bad people? And normally it's like, either yes, transparently, obviously they do, and I'm not torn by this, or which is tantamount to saying they weren't my people in the first place. Mm-hmm. Or that question won't come up, or it'll only come up in the question of the villain going, "You're not so different from me," which is the other bad pole of this thing. I
saw my friends and family in that, right? Because as an American, a lot of Americans feel like because they have a good life, this good life is American, and there's nothing wrong with America because I have great friends and great family. But those things are not dependent on your nationality. But it's really easy to conflate those two, especially when the government has, been campaigning on that point forever.
Yeah, I think also what makes Rainey's situation interesting is that she's not a Alastel, natural citizen, or what is it? Like, she wasn't born in Alastel. She's a war refugee, right? Who loses her family, her biological family in Cygnus, and then she travels, joins a mercenary group, loses her mercenary family, which was obviously a big deal for her. And then she gets taken in by Alastel, so it's like a found family. And so for her, it's a really big deal to, be told you have to go against your, this found family that has really kind of taken you in when they didn't have to and taken care of you in it. And so her decision is not light, and I'm glad that they didn't make it light for her.
One thing I would have really preferred, though, is that you fight Rosh, where you fight Viola instead. That would have been way cooler for me.
You mean, towards the end of the game?
Yes, and that part where you are storming Granorg, because Hugo is in the castle and Viola's there to defend him, and they're like, Viola, you know what's going on, but Viola's like, cough, cough, I'm dying anyway. I'm like, okay, this is to contrive. But I'm like, what if it was Rosh? And then there would actually be stakes involved, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it would get in the way of having already had the confrontation with Rosh earlier in the game.
Yeah, but then you could have just make Viola be that character instead.
Yeah, the Rosh thing is kind of really built up really early on, and did set that initial decision. You get the vision, you're going to fight Rosh and kill him, and then you have to decide, do I join Rosh's brigade, or do I stay with Heist? Which of those is more likely to end up with me killing Rosh? Mm-hmm. And you can tell that it's a trick question, but it's a tricky enough trick question that it's not entirely obvious which way you're being tricked, but then they kind of sell it all out because he just turns up in the middle of nowhere.
That's right.
Yeah.
He just steps out of a bush.
I still really like that scene because it's like the
Also, you just called him Bosch. You goofed and no.
Boshy.
Now we have to
Whenever
call it
I-
Bosch von Ronsenberg.
Whenever I hear Rosh, though, I think of like fraternity guy, basically. Like a Chad, that's a Rosh to me. Which he is in the game.
His jawline is amazing. On the actual character art, his jawline is incredible. When he smiles, like the whole like shape of his mouth inverts.
But yeah, it's like, so I make fun of the Heist redemption thing because it's really corny and contrived, and Heist isn't a character that can be redeemed. He's like 80 years old. I mean, he can be, but it doesn't mean that much, whatever. But the fact that, like, this is like the one good thing about the time travel conceit. They have the scene where it's Suikoden now, and Rosh and Stocke are going to fight to the death because one's trying to save the world and the other one loves their country. Or, actually, that's not how Suikoden goes, but whatever. Just say it is.
It makes more sense than Suikoden.
Yeah, it does. I was like, wait, Suikoden's way dumber.
In Suikoden, it's because one got the red sword and the other got the blue shield.
In Suikoden, it's like, I have to go to the country I hate to save the world. It's like, no, you don't. Okay. But anyway, so they get to have that like brother confrontation with like where someone actually dies at the end, right? Because these are things neither of them can budge on. But then Stocke's like, but this isn't right. This isn't how things should be. And you do the time travel stuff, and then Rosh actually, sees the error of his ways. And I think maybe that's more redemption than necessary. But when I played this game, I played it in the middle of 2016, and there were the tensions were really high in my family, and I was just getting in a lot of arguments about various things, and I was feeling more than normally disillusioned about, America and a lot of things. So when I played this scene when playing through the game in general, where these very patriotic but like good meaning people got to figure out what's really important in life. I don't think that's like a realistic thing that can happen in real life necessarily, but it's a very comforting thing to play through for me.
Uh-huh.
Like I can like the power fantasy of Radiant Historia is that there's hope for people still. You can live in hope, and that really imprinted in me when I was playing it during the 2016 election, because that was exactly the message I kind of needed, or I would have became even more dejected about the state of affairs.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Rosh 2 is the way that you solve that problem is you help him find a resolve that he didn't have, which is interesting because it suggests that the reason why Rosh defaults to kind of his nationalism is because he's terrified about what's happening.
Rosh has the same part as Rini where he takes days to make a decision, but Rosh is weaker than Rini because his community is the war, and he's grown up in this country that's focused on the war so much, and the only thing he knows is, what his country's told him, and so he doesn't know how to move on from there because he's never tried to do anything else in his life. And so it's not that deep or anything, but it's just really pleasant that he gets to come to grips with stuff and join Stocke, basically.
It's a pleasant game all around, really.
Yes, potentially, especially with the optional content, like it becomes banal, but if you just do the core 20 hours, I think pleasant is a good word for it.
I think it was always kind of banal, though. One thing I got kind of irritated, like more than halfway through the game. I even went on Twitter with my irritation, and I was like, I think it's really obnoxious when a character is just good all the time, and because that's not it's I don't know. I kind of feel divorced from it because they're just too good. But then I realized
Stocke is kind of a silent protagonist who speaks, though, right?
Yeah, basically. I also realized that Stocke does make mistakes. He just gets to redo them, and so that helped me deal with that. But he is kind of overbearing at parts, and he's kind of just like unnaturally good to the point of where it's parodic at the end with Heist. I keep bringing that up because it annoys me.
Yeah, he's a bit angelic, but then that's why Gafka does the Jesus Christ bit with him.
Yeah. So it's not. I don't think it's a very, even though it's very conservative politics, it's not a very responsible game. Like, it's not a responsible portrayal of these conflicts, but it's a very hopeful one, which I guess I prefer.
There's something to be said for it.
Like, Stocke is the type of... He was so good that when it was revealed, spoiler alert, I guess, that he is actually, Erica's brother, who is like, at this point, everybody's been talking up Ernst as this perfect person. That, like, when it was revealed that Stocke is Ernst, which I had been kind of suspecting for a while, I was like, oh, that explains why he's good.
Yeah.
Which is like a horrible explanation, but it's like that he's so kind of like bland good that, like, oh, he actually was, like, in his past life the perfect prince. That's why he's good. It's like, oh, well, at least there's an explanation, I guess. I don't know. Like,
I mean,
it's a terrible one.
that actually kind of becomes problematic, because that perfect prince archetype is a really dangerous one anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have, that is him, and it's kind of a genetic truth about him that he's actually as good as the myth.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the perfect prince who gets driven out by the evil father for being too nice.
Mm-hmm.
Just being like this mythic image of the noble royalty.
At least it was more like his uncle thought he was way too good, so he's like, you gotta get evil, man. I'm taking you away from me.
Yeah.
You want some weed, Stocke? Will it help me do my mission? Okay.
I guess that, I mean, kind of diegetically, like in the story, right? Like, that is the purpose of the White Chronicle, kind of, right? Is to, like, turn you into, like, a Jesus figure, right? Like, that you live all these lifetimes, you understand these are the futures that you're trying to save, and so your soul becomes so deep that it has, like, right? Like, that's kind of like the purpose of the White Chronicle, is to turn you into a Jesus figure, right? Like, so, I mean, I guess, if you have, like, 1,000,000 lifetimes, right? I don't know.
But when you sit there, it's just like, oh, the game's contrived. That's what happens, basically.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy of circumstance, and all the circumstances are made up.
And all the points don't matter.
I mean, yeah, like, because then the side characters are just way more interesting. I mean, which is usually the case, I guess, in most JRPGs, but the side characters are way more interesting than Stocke ever really is. I guess that's par for the course.
I mean, I still like what Stocke represents,
mm-hmm.
but not interesting at all.
I think he's definitely more pleasant, kind of getting back to that theme, than most JRPG, bland male protagonist characters.
Oh, yeah, I mean, his blandness is being nice, not being like a stereotypical guy, right? So that's way better.
Yeah, exactly. And you do kind of see him be human with other characters. I mean, kind of in a really, like, almost deific kind of way, but, like, at least he has these kind of relationships.
He grows up.
People.
He grows up at the end. That's kind of like I interpreted Stocke dying as kind of an ego death for him too, because the character Stocke at the beginning is just dedicated to doing his job, and then the Stocke at the end is I love my friends, that's pretty good. That's a good character arc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's like it gives his overwhelming niceness kind of an edge or a contour, and that he's not just super nice and kind of a doormat and just does whatever to, like, please as much people as he can, or as many people as he can. Like, he kind of gets a purpose for why he's nice, why he's so nice, I guess. I don't know if that made any sense.
I think so.
And this game doesn't really make a lot of sense, to be honest. But it's fun, right? I feel like because of the fact that, I don't know, like, time travel stories as a genre are very weird to me, I think, and very difficult to do because you're kind of messing with the very basic idea of a story, which is that, like, it's linear, that there is, like, a sequence of events that have consequences that lead to other consequences, and you're trying to figure out what happens next, why does it happen? Like, that's kind of like the very core idea of a story, and time travel stories mess with that. And I think what Radiant Historia does really well is that it doesn't focus a whole lot on kind of the things that we tend to get caught up on with time travel stories, which is, like, the paradoxes and the weirdness and, like, well, what happens if you change this and what happens if you change that? And it really focuses on the idea of, like how do people experience time, and what is the nature of consequences, and what is the nature of people in general in these kind of situations, and, exploring the idea of, like, well, if I did things differently, what would happen? And I think what's fascinating. It kind of breaks down in Radiant Historia, because the whole point is that you have all of these different choices, but then whenever you get a bad ending, it's like you make one choice and then suddenly da 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 da, and like 30 years later this happens, and you don't see what happens during those 30 years, right? Like, it's so. But at the same time, it does explore this idea of consequences in a way that a lot of other time travel games, like I would even say like Chrono Trigger, which is like so beloved by a lot of people, doesn't really get into the idea of like consequences and decision making.
I called Chrono Trigger time travel tourism.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that idea of tourism is really important actually when it comes to time travel, because the way that particularly the like Western sci-fi tradition portrays time travel, it's always, well, I don't know, there are two versions. There's the Terminator way and there's the Back to the Future way. And the Terminator way is about being visited by a time traveler and having your entire life fucked up by a time traveler. And the Back to the Future way is you travel, like you or the character travels and fucks things up for everyone. And the Back to the Future kind of story is way more popular. It's way more popular to tell stories about the agent than it is about the patients or the victims of this. And kind of the reason I'm a little bit suspicious of the Radiant Historia structure is that it's all about the agent. Like, I mean, Ted, you mentioned the point about it, like, how do we experience time? It's all about how the agent experiences time. And the way it resolves everything into a narrative is that Stocke, despite all the bubbling and bobbling around through time, has a fairly conventional narrative arc. I mean, he lacks... It doesn't have a low point, the kind of traditional start of Act 3 low point that a grand narrative would normally have, but he's got a character arc. And the reason, this is going to sound like a bit of a tangent, but the reason I love FF13-2 so much is that it is a story about somebody who gets swept up in time travel that really is for the benefit of other people. And like, you're dragged around by a time traveler who's trying to resolve their own emotional needs, and he's kind of using you to do that, or partly using you to do that. And I think that's a broader survey of how people experience time. Because it's like, well, things get fucked up when you mess with time. And I'm probably going to write something on this eventually, but you know, it's not just tourism, it's exploitative tourism, what Marty McFly does.
It's usually nostalgic and, damn, I forgot my other word. But it's, I mean, yeah, exploitive is a good word for it too. It's
like, it turns this collection of real people into props, sometimes for nostalgia, sometimes for exoticism. I was also going to say it's like this way to fix your mistakes without doing the real way of fixing your mistakes, which is just like, oh shit, I gotta do better next time. It's like, what if instead you go back to the other time and there won't be a next time? It's like, I don't... And that tendency crops up a lot in time travel too, where it's just like going against the basic way of how to be a better person.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Like, so, because I brought up Braid in the beginning, and Braid is interesting in that you can read it in a way where it's explicitly kind of critiquing the idea of time travel as like a way to fix mistakes by implying that you can't, that it kind of posits in the beginning, because you can read the story forwards and it just kind of, the books, right? Like, you can read it the kind of the linear way and it degrades into nothingness, like just drivel. And then if you read it backwards, it's, you know, like starting from right to left instead of left to right. The story becomes a story about a guy who makes a huge mistake, hurts somebody, tries to come back and be like, but I learned, you know, my lesson, so like, can we pretend like it never happened? And it's like, of course you can't. Of course you can't pretend like it never happened. That's not how time works. And so it kind of becomes a critique of that idea of like, well, if we use time travel to fix all of these mistakes, wouldn't it be better? Which is why I really didn't like Keel coming back, because it just makes everything that he did trivial. Like, yeah, like I think that is something that Radiant Historia does, that Becky brought up, where people become props. Like, Keel becomes a prop. And I think that's really disrespectful of like who Keel is as a person, because he's pretty fleshed out for like a NPC that isn't playable, or, you know, like a playable, non-playable character.
I mean, cynically, the reason he's fleshed out is to be a tragic character, but...
Well, yeah.
The other thing on the fantasy of time travel is the Back to the Future ending, where what you do is you go back in time and you quote-unquote fix things, and then back in the new future that you create, suddenly, instead of like your family being the peons to a more successful family, your family the more successful family, and the people who were bullying you are now your peons, like cleaning the car and so on. And that's really suspect.
Yeah.
As a use of time travel and as part of the time travel fantasy. And it all relates to ideas of kind of narrative agency and heroism and what it is to be a hero versus what it is to be a bystander in fiction. Some of what makes Keel's death important is that it shows that Stocke can't always do that, right? It says, Stocke can't always be the special boy. Sometimes that option isn't on the table. Except that it is, because the game just sells it out.
Yeah, because especially in terms of agency, like what Radiant Historia does, unfortunately, which a lot of time travel stories do, like you pointed out, is that the only person who has agency is the agent, right? Like everybody else is a victim of their own circumstances, so you just have to tweak the circumstances in order to get them to become a better person, which is also why the whole redemptive arc for the villains is awful, because like these villains use their agency to become the types of people that they are, right? Like, it's not just because they had a bad childhood or they forgot what was important to them. It's because they have goals that are different, and so this idea of like Stocke being like able to kind of tweak the circumstances that people grow up in order to become the types of people that he needs them to be in order to progress the time the way he wants it to progress is just deeply problematic, because then he's the only person who kind of has any kind of agency. Everybody else is just a puppet or an algorithm,
That's not just a time travel thing. That's a video games thing.
Well, yeah.
Video games are hilariously bad at evoking agency on the part of any character other than the player character and the villains.
Well, it becomes more like that when there's one solitary main character and there's choices with consequences. Like what Ted is describing is also the problem with Mass Effect, which doesn't have time travel, but it does have a bunch of props and puppets for your own entertainment.
I think what Radiant Historia does do okay is that Stocke, he kind of acknowledges, even though the game doesn't allow the characters to have agency, the characters who are not Stocke never, for the most part, he never kind of treats his friends as object lessons. I'm so glad you're around because I learned to be a compassionate person. I mean, he says, I'm glad I have friends like you, and now I have something to fight for. But he never really treats their experiences as like something that is just there to make him a better person. I don't know. At least that's how I read it.
Yeah, also his goal is to like stop time travel. No one can time travel no more.
Yeah.
Which it's still the problem, like he gets to do all of that, but he's not just like a goober messing up time. He's like, well, time travel's stupid, and I'm going to end it.
Yeah. Right. Is that everything?
Yeah.
Ted, would you like to define teleology for Sari? Or shall I do it?
Sure. I mean, so teleology comes from the Greek word telos. If I'm remembering correctly, it kind of means like that, like a purpose or an end, right? That if something has a teleology, it means that something has like a specific purpose or end that it's working towards. So when I say things like history isn't teleological, it means that history doesn't have any kind of specific purpose that it's working towards, right? Like, for example, modern positivism is like, this ideology that history is always getting better, right? People are always getting better. So like the idea is that there's kind of like a positive teleology to history that, over time things are always getting better, which is not the case.
Or like the more common progressive ideology, as in we're progressing to better people and a better culture, which is like not how it works.
Yeah. Exactly. And what's really interesting about Radiant Historia is that it actually posits that history is not teleological, and then it forces history to be teleological.
Yeah, any kind of destiny is a teleology, if you like.
Yeah.
So that covers that one, and that's kind of our question for for the month.
To be fair, it does force it to be teleological, but also that's just because the premise, the pitch is one of these histories is going to make it so humans get to live.
Yeah.
So that's just how it kind of works out.
I would like a game like Radiant Historia with an ensemble cast, so it doesn't feel like
Yes.
So it doesn't run into that agent problem, right? You're not just flipping through time, you're flipping through characters in different points of time. That would be cool. But another alternate way would be like instead of bad end, just going bad end, you can actually play it. And if the story could allow for more ambiguous endings, then it wouldn't feel like you're just... I mean, it would be tourism of different things that could happen, but it's not like, I'm trying to bend everyone to my will kind of thing.
Yeah. But, I mean, you're talking about a system where you have exponentially more complexity to design and more stuff to design to do that, this is the reason that games can't do time travel stories, apart from Shadow the Hedgehog.
I mean, it would just be more, like, Radiant Historia has like 5 levels, right? The normal JRPG has like 20, 30. You could do the normal scope and then copy Radiant Historia. That's still really expensive, though. But, I mean, Radiant Historia has 5 levels, which is part of the reason why it is what it is.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you for joining us for this episode of DGC. Thank you, Ted, for joining us in particular.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Due to technical difficulties, we're going to be skipping Tactics Ogre for our next game and moving straight on to our year-end game, Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Also subtitled Lucifer's Call in Europe, this game features Dante from the Devil May Cry series.
Yes, it does.
In all seriousness, though, it's probably the most lauded SMT game out there, and it's available on the PSN for PS3, though the True Demon ending will cause unavoidable freezing in the European release, unfortunately, so avoid that. It's also a PS2 game, so if your computer is up to snuff, you can probably emulate it with no issue. After that, we'll be doing our anniversary episode, where we take a look back at how the year has gone, and we're recording that separately so as to lessen the workload on me, so we'll be revealing the game to come after it next episode. Where can folks find you, Ted?
Well, I am on Twitter, at Teo, which is named after the Black Chocobo in Final Fantasy VII.
Nice.
Teioh. So that is mostly where I reside on the internet is Twitter. The hellscape that is Twitter.
We just can't escape.
Nope.
You can find our work on our website, jrpgsaredead.fyi, or our Twitter at jrpgsaredead, or individually at Invisible for me, at Eat the Pen for Becky, and at Was Not, Why Not for Leroy. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/deadgenre. Also, please enjoy our affiliated podcast. I'm joined by Sam Howard on Myth and Kin as we work our way through the Witcher franchise from books, which we'll be wrapping up soon, to games. And Leroy and John Thayer can be found on World Revolution discussing independent and underground RPGs. Both can be found on our Libsyn feed. Join us next time for episode 35 of Dead Genre Chronicles. Good night, everybody.